Hey guys, this is Professor Tiffany Martin with Medical Microbiology, and we are working our way through Chapter 15, the innate immune response. And we have worked through the first line of defense and the second line of defense, and we are all the way down here. And the last few things I want to cover in this chapter is some processes that are involved in the second line of defense. Fever and inflammation. And both of these are words you know, words that you've had some experience, conditions you've had some experience with going through. So let's see what's happening at the cellular level. For fever and inflammation and how that is protecting us in our innate immune response to any non-specific foreign invader. Okay, so inflammation. Inflammation is actually defined as non-specific response. Remember, innate, this is non-specific, and it's a response to any type of tissue damage you may have. So that is the definition of inflammation. It's just a response to tissue damage. Now we can divide it into two types. We can have acute inflammation or chronic. Acute is when you stub your toe and it swells up and gets inflamed. So that's inflammation that's acute. Or you do a heavy workout and you've got muscle soreness and some inflammation on that. It develops quickly and it usually is resolved quickly. It's your body's response to some tissue damage. You stubbed your toe or you worked really hard on your workout. It's your body's response to tissue damage. It is actually helpful. A lot of athletes want to immediately reduce inflammation, and maybe that's not necessarily the best thing. We don't want it to get we don't want it to go on too long, but some acute inflammation is not necessarily a bad thing, and it actually is helping because what it's doing is it is allowing the blood vessels in that damaged area to dilate, to get larger, and to become more permeable in that area. What does that do? Well, that's going to send a lot of blood because they're dilated, they're larger than normal, a lot of blood into that region. What's coming in that blood? Well, phagocytes are coming. If you had a cut or something and you've damaged yourself, you might have some pathogens that have been able to enter in that area. We're going to bring in some white blood cells to make sure you don't have any pathogens in there. We're also bringing in clotting factors if there was bleeding to repair. So tissue repair is coming in. From that. You're getting extra nutrients to start the repair process. You're getting extra gases, oxygen to there to help some of that repair process. So all of this stuff is usually beneficial. Now, how do you know you've got inflammation? Well, it's characterized by redness, heat, swelling, and pain. And this is all easily explained when we talk about this dilation and increased permeability of blood vessels. Redness in the area, well, I've got more blood. Heat, same thing, more blood. Swelling, again, more blood, dilation and permeability. And the last one is pain, characterized by pain. If those blood vessels in the area are expanding, they're going to push on nerves in that same area. So you're going to feel some pain. So if inflammation, if it's severe enough, you can get some pain in that area. Okay, so acute inflammation, not usually a bad thing. It's usually just to help your body repair some minor damage, make sure there's no bacteria that got in there as well. Chronic inflammation, this is different. Chronic inflammation, you can get that in your joints with different joint diseases, arthritis, where you get constant inflammation in the joint that doesn't go away and lasts a long time. People who have asthma get inflammation in their bronchial regions, and that stays inflamed. Both of these are, and these types of conditions, chronic inflammation, these can cause problems. Your body is just responding to damage. They're just responding to that. It's trying to repair it. But in the process of trying to repair it, by lasting so long, it's going to cause some additional problems. So chronic inflammation is typically treated by some anti-inflammatories. So that's what they're talking about when you're dealing with inflammation and what you can do, that the inflammation itself, if it lasts too long, can cause diseases. All right, but acute inflammation, not necessarily a big deal. All right, so how does this happen? How does inflammation happen? Well, we just talked about the complement cascade. So here is a white blood cell, granulocyte there. It showed up with that there. There are, when it's in the bloodstream, you've got it's in the bloodstream and you have some complement proteins that are there and they will bind to these granulocytes. Those granulocytes will then start to produce inflammatory mediators, and that will start this inflammation. So we said that the outcomes of complement cascade will be inflammation, and this is how it does it. It binds to these white blood cells. They produce these inflammatory mediators. So what are inflammatory mediators? They're going to trigger that dilation of the blood cells, increase permeability. Ones that we have identified a few of them: bradykinin, prostaglandins, leukotrienes, histamine. Any of these sound familiar? A lot of students will tell me histamine is very familiar, and it's familiar because you take antihistamines. Anybody have allergies here in Houston? A lot of times you're on long-term antihistamines all the way through spring because of your allergies. Histamine is an inflammatory mediator. It's going to cause some inflammation. Inflammation, you're going to get that increased dilation of your blood vessels and permeability of your blood vessels. The permeability of your blood vessels is going to cause that fluid to leak out into the surrounding tissues, and you're going to have fluid leaking out of your tissues. It's got to get out of your body. It's coming out your nose. It's coming out of your eyes. You get those watery eyes. You get sinus issues. That is a direct result of your body's immune response to allergens, pollen in the air or whatever. It's going to cause some inflammation. Now your body, you're trying to tell your body, hey, this isn't a problem, chill out, but your body says it might be, and so you get that allergic response in that allergies. But you live in Houston, you have to keep working, and so you take an antihistamine to stop that inflammation so that you can still function without your nose and your eyes watering all the time. So that's how you can block that inflammatory response with an antihistamine. Now, favorite antihistamines, if you guys are taking them long term, I hear like Allegra, Zyrtec, some of those types of things. Benadryl is an antihistamine, and that is one of the classic ones. Most of the people don't take Benadryl if you're dealing with seasonal allergies. Why not? Because it makes you sleepy. Benadryl has a side effect that causes drowsiness, and so it's not really good for long-term for that, like for an allergic response for that. It is great for a short-term allergic response. You got a bee sting or something, and you want to take that, and you're swelling up at the site of the bite. Benadryl is a quick-acting antihistamine. It's always good to have around for that thing. The reason you get drowsiness is that Benadryl is a first-generation antihistamine, and it will cross the blood-brain barrier. We talked about how the blood-brain barrier can maybe we haven't yet, but the blood-brain barrier, if you've had A&P or something, you have learned that it's not easy for things to cross into the brain. The capillaries are so small, things can't cross through. That's a way to protect ourselves from pathogens. We don't want pathogens to cross through, but drugs don't cross through very well either. Benadryl will. Benadryl will cross that blood-brain barrier, which is why one of the side effects is drowsiness. The newer generations, like Claritin, Zyrtec, whatever, they do not cross the blood-brain barrier, and so therefore their side effects don't include the drowsiness from that. All right, so that is an antihistamine from that. Another one that you may not realize is prostaglandins. We take antiprostaglandins as well. Antiprostaglandins are your NSAIDs, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Those are the ibuprofen, naproxen, Advil is in there, all of those types of drugs. Again, you'll take Advil when you have a headache. You'll take Advil after a hard workout. What you're trying to do is decrease your inflammation. You've got a headache because there's some inflammation going on. It's pressing on those nerve cells and your nerve endings, and you get that pain. So you want to relieve that, or after a heavy workout. Again, acute inflammation serves a purpose. So if you're in the habit, I know some of the people who work out a lot, if you're in the habit of taking an ibuprofen after every heavy workout, that's something you may want to reevaluate because, again, that inflammation is serving a purpose. So I just want to tell you that. There's some other ones as well, but those are the ones I wanted to focus on because those are the ones you have some familiarity with. Okay, so let's talk another thing about inflammation. We've already said we've got increased dilation and permeability of the blood vessels that allows these white blood cells and other things to get to that area. So I've got phagocytes moving into that area, which is good because I might have had a cut. I might have pathogens in that area. I need my phagocytes to get there. Increased blood flow brings those to the site of the infection. Now we know phagocytes are capable of diapedesis. Diapedesis is defined as being able to leave the circulatory system because if you have a cut or some damage, you might have pathogens in tissues, but not in your circulatory system. So we need to bring those in there so they're capable of diapedesis. I do want to talk about margination, and that is the way diapedesis occurs. So let's look at those blood vessels. They are dilated, they're getting larger, and they're getting more permeable, so there are more holes that those white blood cells can get out and undergo diapedesis. Now, the way this happens is the process of margination, and I like to think of this as easy for me to understand if you compare it to one of those lazy rivers. Anybody been to a water park? So you go to a water park, you get in a lazy river, and you're in your tube, and you're going down, and your kids are with you, and they're like, "Oh, let's get out and do something else." And so they go to the next opening to get out. Now you want to go over there, but you're way over here, and your kids are ahead of you, and you get stuck in the current. And if you're just in the middle of the current, your kids are exiting the side and you're going down the lazy river and you missed it. So in order for our white blood cells to be able to get out of our circulatory system and exit the current of blood flow, they do a process called margination. So the sides of the lazy river, if I know I want to exit at the next opening, I'm going to get myself out of the main current and I'm going to hold on to the sides. I'm going to walk along the sides where the current is less, and then if I can hold on to the sides, I can get to the exit, and then I can leave the lazy river. Same thing with the white blood cells. They bind to proteins on the walls of the blood vessels, and then they will transfer and kind of walk down, binding from protein to protein along the sides and the walls of the blood vessels until they get to an area that is a little more permeable, more open, and they can squeeze through. That process is margination. So diapedesis, the process of leaving, how that occurs, by margination from that. So ask me questions if you need to. Okay, so we've got those phagocytes. They're squeezing out by margination. They're attracted once they get out of the circulatory system. Those pathogens are in the tissues. They've got chemotactic factors. The pathogens are making some factors. We know complement is going on. There's complement there. Oh, the complement got them there. They will follow that until they find the pathogen and can undergo phagocytosis. The last part of inflammation, we said all of those things is going there. We said extra nutrients and oxygen are going there. And all of this is going to repair that area, and then your inflammation will resolve. Now, some parts of your body can be repaired. Some parts of your body cannot. If you have a cut in your skin, that's easily repaired. Epithelial cells are always replicating. It can be repaired very easily. You may or may not have a scar. There are some tissues that do not replicate. Your heart, you have a heart attack and you've got damage in your heart muscle. That cannot be repaired, and you end up with a lot of scar tissue from there. So not all areas, not all tissues are able to be repaired and functional after inflammation. Okay, all right, I'll let you go through this as a review so you can stop that and maybe answer some questions on it. One thing I want to point out is we haven't talked about pus and blood clots. So a blood clot is going to form. We've said that the bleeding is a good thing to get pathogens out, but then we don't want to leave that open area. And so platelets also come during this dilation of blood vessels, and platelets will plug up this area, clotting factors, and keep the blood and keep the cut from being open so more pathogens can come in. So you get a blood clot that forms in that area. You've got some tissue damage, so you might have some pus that forms in that area. Your body will either reabsorb this, or the pus may form like a little boil and you might have to lance it. The blood clot eventually will either be reabsorbed or fall off as a scab. All right, so go through that video and work through the process of inflammation and bring your questions. The last thing is fever. Fever is another process that is actually good for you. Body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. You should know that, 37 degrees Celsius. Fever happens when, okay, here's my A&P people again. The hypothalamus job is to regulate body temperature. There are some times when we have certain chemicals in our body that will trigger the hypothalamus to raise our body's temperature. Our hypothalamus normally keeps us at 37 degrees Celsius, but when these molecules are present, they will trigger the hypothalamus to raise that. These molecules are called pyrogens. Love that word because pyromaniac, pyrogens, fire, fever, I'm all about that. So pyrogens are the molecules that trigger the hypothalamus to raise their temperature. So what are pyrogens? Okay, bacteria stuff will serve as pyrogens. Anything that's bacterial, like the toxins that they make, or the junk where your phagocytes are chopping up the bacteria and then exocytosis and it's released out, those types of things will serve as pyrogens. When antibodies bind to pathogens and their antigens, that will serve as a pyrogens. So any of that stuff, if it's present in your body, those molecules will trigger the hypothalamus to raise your temperature. All right, so why do you want to do that? Well, a higher temperature actually inhibits the growth of some microbes. Remember we talked about temperatures and microorganisms are since they have an optimum growth temperature. Just by raising that a few degrees, that can inhibit the growth of some microbes. So that's a good thing. Interferon, we just learned about how interferon protects us. Interferon works better at a slightly higher temperature. We also think a slightly higher temperature helps out our phagocytes and the tissue repair process and all of these kinds of things. So a low-grade fever is actually a good thing. Your body can fight off what it needs to better. It's part of your innate immune response. So again, as soon as this stuff comes in, doesn't matter what it is, it triggers, it serves as pyrogens and triggers that raise in temperature. Low-grade fever is fine, 99, 100, 101 even, 102 if you can stand it. Now we know that the higher you get, your proteins will start to denature. So once you start getting into 105, 106, our body can't handle that. That's where your body has overcompensated. Your fever is way too high, and in order not to get long-term damage to our body because of the fever, then we need to intervene and bring down those fevers. So you bring in some of those antiprostaglandins and other things that trigger a fever and keep that fever under control. But low-grade fever, it's okay. And in fact, if you've got a viral disease, if you can handle it, let the fever go. Don't try to, if you've got 100, 101 or something, let the fever do that because your body tells you to stay on the couch. You don't feel good. Let your body fight the illness like it's supposed to. All right, so all of those are innate immune responses. Don't exactly know how the fever works, so we don't need to talk about it. There's a chart. I'll let you review that, and that is the end of our innate immune response. Bring your questions to Zoom. Thanks for being with me, and I'll see you guys later.